Today we're going to look at how to make a solution. Not only do the calculations, but also how to prepare it in the lab. For this example, I need to make 100 milliliters of a 0.1 molar solution of potassium ferrocyanide. Formula for potassium ferrocyanide is K3Fe parentheses Cn close parentheses 6. Let's take a look at how to do the calculations and then prepare the solution in lab. Again, I want to make a 0.1 molar solution and 100 milliliters of potassium ferrocyanide. First thing I have to do is calculate how many moles of potassium ferrocyanide I need, and then I'll convert it to grams. Again, to calculate moles, I take my concentration and I multiply it by the total volume I'm looking for. In this case, I'm going to need 0.01 moles of potassium ferrocyanide. Now I can use the molar mass to convert this to grams. The molar mass of potassium ferrocyanide is 329.26 grams per mole. When I multiply these together, I get that I need approximately 3.29 grams. Now that I know how much I need, I can go over into the lab to start preparing the solution. Now that we've looked at how to calculate how much of our chemical we need, let's look at how to set up our station before we measure out our chemical. The first thing we're going to need is a volumetric flask, and we've got a couple different styles for these. We have this one, which we can see has a nice smooth top. And we have this one, which has a ground glass joint. There's a couple different options for these. The one we're going to work with is the smooth topped one, and we're going to find an appropriate rubber stopper to fit in the top. So this will fit in snugly without going all the way down into the flask. I'm also going to get a beaker of distilled water with more than the capacity of my flask. I'm just going to fill it up with extra so I know I have plenty to use. The other things I'm going to make sure I have at my station are a barrel pipette and a wash bottle filled with distilled water. Now that I've measured out my ingredients, I've measured 3.323 grams of potassium ferrocyanide. I'm going to start by carefully pouring this into the flask. I'm going to gently tap it, make sure that all of the solid gets down into the flask. Once I've got everything that's not stuck, there are actually two different options. I can either remeasure the mass of my weighing boat to figure out how much went in, or the second option is to, again, gently spray a little bit of water into my weighing boat using my wash bottle. Tap it a couple times and make sure that all of my chemical has been washed into the flask. I'm then going to slowly and carefully use my beaker to pour some water until the bulb of the flask is about half full, being careful not to spill anything on the outside. Once the bulb is full, I'm going to pick up my flask and I'm going to swirl it. And while I'm swirling, I'm trying to get all of the solid to dissolve. As I'm swirling, I'm inspecting, seeing if all of the solid has dissolved. If not, I can add a little bit more water and swirl again. Got just a little bit of solid that's being stubborn in here. So I've added a little more water and I want to swirl it again. My goal is to have all of the solid dissolved before I finish filling this up. Once I have all of the solid dissolved, I'm going to continue filling the flask until the water level reaches the neck. Once the water level reaches the neck, I need to go a lot slower. I'm going to use this line here as my full line. So I'm going to use my barrel pipette, fill it up, and I'm going to slowly add water until the meniscus is directly on that line. So now I can see the meniscus is directly on the line. I'm going to put the rubber stopper in the top of the flask. I'm then going to use my thumb and hold this rubber stopper in place, or my finger, and then I'm going to invert this bottle several times. I'm going to get the bubble up top, and then I'm going to shake a little bit and keep inverting. Once I've shaken it and I've inverted it several times, I'm then going to double check the meniscus and make sure that it is still directly on the line. In this case, it's actually not. It's actually dropped just slightly below. I'm going to unstopper the flask and add a few drops of water until the meniscus gets right back on the line. Invert a few more times to make sure it's thoroughly mixed. And then you want to check the line again to make sure the meniscus is set correctly. When I look at this flask, I see that it's a 100 milliliter flask. And then just to the right, there is a very small plus minus. This tells us the error of the flask. That first digit there, we're going to assume our significant digit is to the first digit of our plus minus. This one is plus or minus 0.16. It's kind of hard to see in there. So I'm going to assume this is 100.0 milliliters in this flask. Now that we've looked at the preparation process, let's take a look at how to calculate our actual concentration. In lab, I measured 3.323 grams of potassium ferrocyanide. I was aiming for 3.29, but this was what I actually measured. And because of the plus or minus on the flask, I have 100.0 milliliters, which is the same as 0.1000 liters. I need to convert this to moles, and then I'll divide it by the total volume. When I plug this calculation in, I get 0.01009 moles of potassium ferrocyanide. I then divide this by my total volume, which will give me a final concentration of 0.1009 molar. Let's step back in the lab and label our solution. I have a couple different options that I can use to label. I can either label directly on the glass with a wax marking pen, or I can use a piece of labeling tape. For this one, I'm going to use the labeling tape. The first thing I put is the concentration, which is 0.1009 molar. and it is potassium ferrocyanide. The formula is K3Fe parentheses CN6. So I've labeled my calculated concentration, labeled the formula. I put today's date. And I initial it. So I put my initials. This will tell me anytime that someone uses this, the exact concentration, the formula, the date it was made, and who made it. So I'm going to peel off this labeling tape and stick it to the flask. I stick it to the flask, careful not to rub my fingers along it and rub off the pencil markings. However, it's very difficult to write in pen on this labeling tape. So once it is labeled, again, you have concentration, formula, date it was made, and initials. You have your solution ready to go. Now that we've looked at how to not only do calculations, but also prepare the solutions, we'll be ready for our next lab in which you'll have to prepare your own solution of copper 2 sulfate.